Welcome ladies and gentlemen to the RFM Audio Production channel, where we try to help you get the best possible sound you can out of your mix. On today's episode, we are actually looking at the importance of the low end, the importance of monitoring it, EQing it, and compressing it. If you want to keep up to date on this channel, please like, share, and subscribe down below, that way you don't miss a thing. All of this content is recorded live on Twitch. If you'd like to join me there on stream, there is a link in the description. You can go over there and follow me, and you can join in the chat as well. Anyway, let's get on with the video. Hope you guys are all doing well. Welcome to the RFM Audio Production mixing tutorial. Today we are going to be looking at the low end today. This is quite a interesting subject. It's quite an important one as well. If you want to get your mixes sounding good and clean, and also having that punchy low end as well is a big important part of it. What we're going to go through first, so today we're, like I said, talking about the low end in mixes. Now that's not just looking at mixing like so the bass guitar, the bass instrument. That is looking at everything pretty much kind of resounding, I'd say below 200 hertz. Now it is one of the most important things that people seem to miss, especially new engineers or new people that are completely new to mixing. They tend to actually sort of miss out on what you need in order to hear the low end. It is really easy to get some professional equipment and think you've got everything you need, and you actually don't really get that much low end. So what we're going through is how to properly monitor your low end. That way you can properly hear it and make sure that you're making the proper decisions, the right decisions for your low end. Because if you can't hear it properly, you can't make proper decisions, and then when you go listening to your track and maybe a big set of speakers or like a car, that low end is just kind of really just rumbling, and it's just muddying up the mix. It's just creating a lack of definition within it. So there are multiple ways that you can monitor this. I think the most basic one is getting bigger speakers. You'll find that there's different sizes of woofers and speakers. The set of speakers I have are actually 5-inch. I've got 5-inch woofers. They are actually not that great at producing much below 80 hertz, I would say. It starts to trail off roughly about 80 hertz. I can still hear 100 hertz okay, but once we get to 80 hertz, it really starts to dip off. So how could we fix this? Well, you could get bigger speakers, maybe like 8-inch monitors, which are quite big. And a lot of like professional mixing and recording studios, they actually might have two different sets of speakers. That way they could actually swap between the two to make sure they can hear what the mix sounds and make sure the mix sounds good in different sources. However, another reason is they might have like a bigger set of speakers to make sure that it properly replicates that low end, that those sub basses, those sub frequencies that are actually quite necessary. If you're like me and you actually have your own home mixing studio, there's nothing wrong with that, like having a set of smaller speakers. Yes, there's nothing wrong with having a smaller set of speakers. Maybe you don't have the space or you don't have the budget to buy bigger speakers. There is another way of monitoring low end, which I honestly wouldn't recommend unless you're working in the film industry, and that's buying a subwoofer. Subwoofers are big, they're expensive, they're bulky, and they replicate a lot under 30 hertz, which really in music isn't that musical. Anything below 30 hertz is more of a feeling or a rumble. When you go to a cinema and you're going to go see the latest Michael Bay movie, you know, and you hear that section and that scene in the movie when the big spaceship just comes overhead and all you hear is the boing boing sound, and you get that rumbling feeling in your chest. That's the subwoofer creating those frequencies. Again, I wouldn't really recommend a subwoofer. I've heard some people recommend it for likes of Tracks for genres that kind of call for more low end, something like maybe like hip hop or R&B, maybe even house music. Again, I'd be kind of dubious about this. And if you don't have a big setup and you don't have a lot of space, then a subwoofer really isn't gonna help you an awful lot. So if you can't afford big speakers and can't afford a subwoofer, then what do you use in the end? My biggest recommendation would be to get a set of studio headphones. Not just, please, not just your simple like consumer headphones. Don't get gaming headsets as well. I've heard some people recommend gaming headsets. I personally wouldn't. Gaming headsets, what they generally do is they will increase the low end in order to basically get you to like that way you can enjoy like when you're playing a video game and it's like a real tense moment. Again, it's that kind of effect. It's almost like the subwoofer in films. They boost the low end in order to make it more exciting in the track. If you've got something that boosts low end, you're not going to make a proper decision against that, because you will go to a point, you will boost maybe the low end or the bass guitar or whatever. You will boost that and you'll kind of go, right, that sounds like it's sitting nicely in the mix. But the truth is not. That's only because the low end's been boosted already in the headset. You need to get a set of professional studio headsets. Now, the good thing is that you can get some professional studio headphones, such as these ones. These are Audio Technica headsets. These are absolutely fantastic. What model are they again? They're ATH M50X. Definitely look these up. They're affordable. Not cheap, but not expensive either. Definitely worth looking up. You can easily get them off of Amazon. I have had these bad boys for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years. And they've never once broken on me. They've never once had a problem. The only thing I've had is one of the ear pads did start to, all the leather started to come off and flake away and stuff like that. And I just had to get a new set of ear pads. But these were good. Now, again, I would recommend kind of having like a mix setup. There's actually nothing wrong with doing complete mixes on headphones. That is probably controversial to some of the mixing engineers out there. A lot of them will testify that you have to do everything on a set of speakers, but there's some absolutely incredible mixes out there that have been done solely on headphones because the engineer's been out of the office or out of town and they've not been able to get to their usual setup, so they do it in a set of headphones. When I first started learning how to mix, I did it on headphones as well, and then I got these two HS5 speakers. Yamaha HS5s are absolutely, they're really good, but again, as soon as it gets below 80 hertz, it's hard to hear. So when I'm mixing low end, I go to monitoring on these headphones. There is one other way of monitoring low end. Personally, I wouldn't recommend this. Again, most of and now that I'm thinking about this, I mean, like half of these are recommendations, half of these are not. I wouldn't recommend this for. I would say I wouldn't recommend it for musical decisions. But this is a good way of finding problem frequencies. It's a good way of listening in or looking at it and going, right, I can see what's poking out, what's causing problems. And that can be a spectrum analyzer. It's basically like you can easily get spectrum analyzers for free. I've got one called Span, which you can download for free. Pretty sure it works for any DAW as well. Again, it just shows the frequency analyzer. A lot of EQs include frequency analyzers as well. I was talking to a guy, it was actually on one of the Facebook groups, one of the music Facebook groups, and he was saying he was having a lot of trouble with his low end, mainly replicating it in on his phone. Now I'm actually going to go through why he wasn't actually having trouble getting it through on his phone. But he showed us a spectrum analysis. He sent a graph over to us about it. And looking at it, I was like, that. I mean, I don't know what it sounded like, but that was a lot of low end. He was so proud of his big and thick and punchy kick, but the problem was that he wasn't replicating it properly onto likes of a phone speaker. But honestly, like, I was looking at the spectrum analysis, and I would easily say, again, I think he was mixing hip hop, I believe it was. But I actually do believe that it was a little bit too much. He had a little bit too much low end. Again, like, after you get past 30 hertz as well, that's information I believe you really do not need. Especially in the likes of rock, pop punk, and alternative music, there's not an awful lot of low end. I wouldn't say takes as much of a priority as it does in the likes of EDM or hip hop. But low end is important overall. So we're going to go through a couple of things just now. Where are we going on to? We're going to start off with basic EQing. We're going to take up this dry clean only track that we actually started our simple mix from last week. We're just going to listen through it to a little bit and then listen through it to what we can do to this track, just to clean up the low end a little bit. Again, I would recommend, if you're listening to this, in order to properly hear the low end, I would recommend either listening to this on speakers or headphones. If you're listening to it on your laptop speakers or your phone speakers, you're probably not going to hear a lot of what's going on just now. So, let's continue on, shall we? Let's have a listen to what we got. So obviously this track, we've actually only just recently started mixing again. We only kind of did the levels and the panning, so it's not been edited. It's not been cleaned up in any way. So where can we start? We could start with the bass guitar and the kick. But what I am actually going to suggest is I'm going to actually go through a lot of the other instruments that have a lot of low end, that actually contain a lot of those sub frequencies that are just really not necessary within it. One of the first culprits can easily be an electric guitar. Electric guitar can sound thick, full, and punchy, but they have a habit of like taking up some of the low frequencies. And when you've got a bass guitar, you don't need it. You don't need it in the electric guitars. So let's pull up an EQ. Yeah, go for my favorite one. Fat Filter Pro EQ. Alright. Okay. So let's have a look at the spectrum analysis in this. So you can actually see there's actually a little bit of information, roughly about 100 hertz. So let's pull up a high pass filter. Gonna put out a sharper drop. So generally when you're mixing, I don't recommend doing everything as solo, because you need to do everything in comparison in relation to the mix. However, what I'm doing here is just letting you hear what's going on. So wherever I set this EQ, it'll actually tell you, it'll actually roll off those frequencies below. So I hope you got your headphones in. Have a good listen to this. The guitar's not bad, it hasn't got a lot of frequencies down below 100 Hz, but there is still a little bit of a... You can still hear it coming in. Fantastic. Sometimes what I would recommend is, if you want, you can add a resonance to it. It can actually really kind of like... It basically emphasizes the frequencies before the cut. We could actually just do that here, because sometimes the 100 Hz area... With guitars like this, it can actually sound really quite punchy with it. So let's hear that in relation to the mix, shall we? I'll put that a little bit higher. Alright, there's also another guitar going in. Just gonna copy that over. Now, the next instrument is actually, weirdly, the vocals seem to be doing giving a bit of a problem with the low end, so we're just going to do the same here. When it comes to vocals, it's really not necessary having that much low end. So let's go for it. You can see there is a little bit of a bump, roughly about here. That's information that's just not necessary in a vocal. I'm either falling apart or telling myself I won. Most DAWs are usually CPU intensive, but DAWs have just a habit of crashing anyway. So, let me guess, all that good work I just did earlier of cleaning away that low end is gone, isn't it? Yes, it is. Right, okay, let's do that again. So, just added an EQ to one of the guitars, doing a high pass filter, did that roughly about 100 Hz, put a wee resonant there, just to make it interesting. Save, yeah, exactly. I tell that to everybody, Control S is your friend, but I forget myself, so I'm going to do that right now. No, I'm not trying to save the effects chain. There we go. Control S. There we go. Yeah, no problem at all. Just larking. I appreciate you coming in anyway. That means I got more viewers. That's the main thing, isn't it? Right, there we go. So, that's been cleaned up. See, that resonance, roughly about 100 Hz, really makes the guitar sound that bit beefier. Right, again, with the vocals, doing the same thing, right? But again, you could probably take the high-pass filter up a little bit higher if you like. I found roughly you get muddy frequencies roughly about 300 Hz. So when it comes to vocals, I actually like bringing it to roughly about 150 Hz before I get off. But the roll-off should be a lot more natural, roughly about 12 dB per octave. Hey, Ghost Melon, how you doing? Just cleaning up some low end on this track. Right. That vocal's coming in too loud. I want that down a bit. I would actually say that resonant can work, but I think that's actually kind of muffling up a wee bit. Let's take it over here a wee bit. When it comes to it, I would actually... Just not great ones. Nah, that's no problem at all, man. Right. Another thing I would suggest doing, especially with the low end, is working on the overheads as well within the thing. Where have I done with the overheads? Where are they? There they are. Here they are. So the great thing about the overheads is it captures the whole kit. Okay, yes, a lot of the time they will just pick up, or a lot of the time they'll pick up the cymbals. That's kind of mostly the reason for them. But they'll pick up everything else along with it. They'll pick up the room, they'll pick up the snare, they'll pick up the kick as well. So we just bring it over here. You can actually hear the toms as well. And the problem is that, again, low end can build up here. So I'd recommend, yet again, adding your EQ and cutting off. Not every EQ does this, but if you have likes of the FabFilter Pro Q series, they have this wee section over here called channel mode, and you can change that to mid-side. And then what I like to do is, with the low end, I'll cut the sides out. So I'll probably bring that to roughly about 150. So what that does is, that literally just cuts the low end from the side channels, but the center remains the same. Now, as I've said, 30 Hz isn't really a frequency that you need, so there's no harm in always just putting... I would say it's good habit to at least have 30 Hz cut out on all your tracks. It just cuts out unnecessary information that's there. You can put that quite a sharp dip as well if you want. Again, no one's going to hear it, but if it ends up in a big set of speakers, it could ruin the vibe.
A sunny new day is our affection. I can always get shot to gold. If you get a chance, you know I'll take her. I'm gonna need some soul. I'm gonna find myself some. I'm gonna need some
Oh, man. Right, probably do the same in the rack toms. The toms tend to have a lot of low ends, so let's go through that as well. It's always worth cutting stuff out. Probably put them about 100 Hz. I'm just going to add that same insert to the rest of the toms. Right, probably best doing it in the snare as well. I mean, it's good practice just to at least do a little bit of low cutting on every instrument. So let's just do that. See where. So that's actually not bad just now. We've cleaned up a lot of the unnecessary frequencies in these instruments. Again, you'll probably end up coming back and doing some more EQ with them individually, but it's worth doing a bit of low cuts right at the beginning. That way you can really clean up the mix. After all, really the only thing that should be, in my opinion, the only thing that should be really sticking about at 100 Hz and below is the kick and the bass guitar. So we've done... Yep, so we've done EQing. The next thing I'm going to go over is a little bit of compression for both the kick and the bass guitar. I'm going to bring the bass guitar right next to the kick just so it's a lot easier instead of me going back and forth all the time. This bass guitar is not so bad. It's not such a bad player. Let me just listen to it through again. Okay, so the bass is okay played. It sounds like it's played by a pick. It's played with a pick. Just because it's got that sharp attack going, it sounds like it's played by a pick. The notes aren't too badly... The dynamics in the notes are actually quite good. You can find sometimes... The magical thing about having like an electronic instrument, if it's like an electronic bass, like a synth bass, the dynamics will be exactly the same. There'll be little to no dynamics at all. But when you've got an actual instrument like this, some notes might pop out a lot more than others. And that's where compression comes in. We're trying to bring everything kind of like closer, like all of the levels like closer to each other. And this can actually add presence. It can actually make things sound punchier as well. You can sort of hear... You can actually hear his finger going along the strings, but that's not such a big deal. Hopefully, anyway. See, that note was a bit more forward. Because you can find that the lower notes will actually be a lot louder, they'll be a lot more present, and then maybe like the higher notes will kind of disappear a little bit. So we're gonna, again, add a little bit of EQ. I would just cut out 30 Hertz, right? There's no need to go any lower than that. We're gonna cut out 30 Hertz, and I'll come back to EQing later. This probably isn't really... In fact, no, I think it's probably better off, instead of compression, we're going to go through a technique with the kick. Yeah, we're going to go through a technique with the kick, right? The kick and the bass can easily cause masking with each other. I've talked about this in a previous tutorial. These two instruments can end up, like, either one can end up disappearing because they're kind of resonant within the same frequency range. So we've got two mixing options, right? I call it the skinny fat technique. You can either choose to, and you can do this vice versa, so you can either choose to have a skinny kick or a fat bass, or you can have a fat kick and a skinny bass. Now, what does that mean? So if it's a skinny kick, you'll probably find like a lot of the lower frequencies, like kind of like 100 Hertz is not quite there, you don't have the boominess, but you'll have a lot of the click from the beater actually hitting the kick. And then with the bass, it'll be more resonant to your low boomy sounds. Or you can swap it around. The kick can be more boomy. This is probably more the kind of like the fat kick is probably more prevalent again in like EDM or R&B or hip hop and stuff like that. Whereas the skinny kick fat bass technique is more prevalent in likes of rock or metal music. Now, this is a punk track. I am actually probably going to go for the skinny kick fat bass technique. So, alright, I'm gonna again put a wee bit of resin, roughly about 100. It's got a nice thud. Right, let's try find that click.
So about there, and then we'll cut out some of those mids just to clean up the kick a wee bit. So we're going for the skinny kick with that one. Still got a little bit of low end, but... And then what we'll do with the kick, with the bass guitar, is sort of do the inverse of that. Again, I'm still going to cut off 30 hertz, but nothing really above that. Right. Probably, since we're boosting the 100 hertz, we'll probably cut slightly in there, but... and bring a little bit. What I would never recommend doing when you're working with bass instruments is low passing it. So that's doing basically the inverse, is like cutting off all the highs. The highs are just as important as the lows. You could definitely bring them down slightly, but I would definitely not cut them out. Why is that main reason? Earlier, I was talking about a guy who was having trouble with his sub kick. And he said he had this big, massive, punchy sub kick in the studio, but as soon as he put it onto his phone, he couldn't hear it one bit. That's where you need presence for a sub instrument like that. You need to have some sort of click. You need to have some sort of, maybe if it's in the bass guitar, you need to have some sort of growl, kind of at the higher frequencies, because smaller speakers that are like sort of in your phone or your laptop, or maybe like the wee earbud headphones, they can't replicate low end the same way likes of a professional set of headphones can, or proper speakers. So when we are making, when we are like carving out our lower frequency instruments, we still have to make sure they're going to be present within a mix. You do have to think a lot about where is your music going to be played. Is it going to be played in pubs and clubs? Is it going to be played on somebody listening to it on their phone, or just listening to it along the road? We live in an age where there's not much, at the moment, there's not much for live music. But even before that, the majority of our music consumerism has been through headphones, and not even expensive ones. It can be wee cheap ones that you get with your iPod. So you've really got to be able to, that is why a lot of us mixing engineers, I do the same thing. We will take our mixes after we're done with them, take a wee notebook, and then listen to them in different mediums. I've got wee cheap headphones. I'll probably like put it on Google Drive and listen to it on my phone, or onto the headphones, or go to the car and listen to that. Just to understand what, if there's anything completely disappearing. Now, your mix isn't going to sound as stellar as it does in your mixing environment. It's going to happen, but you still want to make sure that when you listen to it in these different environments, it still sounds good. Doesn't have to sound amazing, because I mean, you're not going to get an amazing sound off of your phone. You're not going to get an amazing sound off of your laptop speakers. But you can still enjoy the music, and you have to make sure that you can still enjoy everything, still place everything. It's worth taking notes as to what's going on, and then you might have to come back to the mix and actually work on those yet again. So, done a wee bit of like carving out with the bass and kick. I'm gonna put a wee shelf there just to add some low shelf. Let's listen to that in context in the mix.
all know what happens next. We all know how it ends. Yeah, I'm a table station, running out of chance.
not bad. The bass and the kick do disappear a little bit. And that's where we're going to bring in compression at that point. I actually went over this earlier, that the performance can go up and down a lot of the time, and what we're trying to do here is actually try to keep it level. So let's again go into the bass, and I will insert. There's this whole debate as to where you should place your EQ and your compressor. I usually EQ first and then compress. Mainly because if you compress first, it's going to bring up all of those frequencies that you don't want back up. So you're better off cutting them before you compress. What compressor shall I use? That's not a compressor, that's delays. Where's my dynamics? There we go. Got let's go for a CLA 76. This is quite an aggressive compressor. So let's have a listen to. So what we're doing is we're keeping an eye on the amount of gain reduction we get. We'll probably try to aim for roughly about like 3 dB of gain reduction. Somewhere between 3 and 5, I would say. So it's quite a lot. Since it's got it's quite a slow. Don't want too fast an attack, but I'm gonna go for a medium to slow release. That way it kind of keeps the compression level throughout the whole thing. Just make sure I get it level matched. That's that level matched, right? For those of you not used to listening to compression, it can be quite a subtle thing. And I do the same with the kick as well. Dropped a note there. I'm going to show some extremes with the kick. So there's a set threshold within the input, and this is how we use the input to actually compress it. So you see that it's getting louder. Now, if I have a fast attack, which is at 7, it is going to compress it faster. So that kind of initial hit of the kick is going to be squashed off. So if I bring it back a little bit, we've got more of that clickiness in the. I don't think I've noticed any of these things before, but hearing the comparison, definitely I noticed. There's a lot in this I never would have thought of when I first got into mixing, but it took me a long time to actually get the handle of listening for compression when I first heard it. I'll never forget, I think it was one of the first times I was actually in university, and I was playing around with this compressor, and I was just messing around with it, thinking I was doing all sorts of stuff with it, and I was like, right, that sounds cool. And then my fellow student went like that, you haven't even turned the compressor on. So I hadn't even been affecting the final signal, I was just making myself look like a tit. So that was fun. Right. Always level match, because anything louder sounds a lot more exciting. So you always have to make sure you level match it to make sure that you're actually making an improvement and not just making it sound louder. Right. So that's it level matched, okay? If you listen carefully, you can hear that the kick is a lot more consistent, whereas it'll kind of be going back up and down when you actually turn off the compressor. So that's it off.
self-control. Gold. If you get a chance, you know I'll take it. I'm gonna need some self-control. I'm gonna find myself some. I'm gonna need some self-control.
So I was just adding some low cuts there, just because I forgot about the fiasco with its crashing and not saving. Side room also. In tracks like this, again, like I said, it's worth working with the bass and then cutting off those lows in the guitars, because the bass guitar, if the bass guitar is used as a support instrument to the guitars, then that can really create the beefiness of it, and then it keeps things from getting too muddy or too undefined as well. That kick sounds like a lot more defined, a lot more interesting. Try to find some of that gorilla in us. Somewhere about there, some of that presence. Just that way we can still hear our bass guitar in, say, like an iPhone. I do have one other form of compression that I sometimes use. I mostly use it for mastering more than I do mixing. It is useful though if you have an instrument that, especially a bass, like any particular instrument that has a particular frequency on a note that's popping out, but you don't want to cut that completely out. You only don't like it at a particular point, and that is a multiband compressor. So a multiband compressor does the same thing as a compressor, but it decides what frequency it is going to do it at. So let's do this. Honestly, this guitar doesn't need it that much, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to bypass this, bypass that, bypass this. So you can see what it's doing is once it gets to a certain level, it will actually pull it down. Now I can just bring the threshold down and make it more. That's pretty much cutting away the low end. We don't really want that. But say like any of the notes kind of popped out, it would just bring it down at that moment that it popped out too much, but it wouldn't keep cutting that frequency, which is very handy if you, like I said, if you have a particular thing that if you cut it, you'll just thin it out. So it helps for that, just for that moment. Again, I wouldn't say there's any particular notes like that in this particular part that has that problem, so I'm gonna leave it off just now. There's plenty of other things you can do with the low end. You're going to be constantly working with the low end. The more elements you add into a mix, you're going to be constantly working at that. When you add a reverb or delay, and then you send instruments to those reverbs or delays, you're probably going to be wanting to EQ those reverbs and delays ever so slightly. And again, you'll probably be wanting to cut down the low end in the track. It is very important to constantly be checking these things, because if you don't have a tight low end like that, if you don't focus on it, you're going to lose complete definition. Everything's just going to disappear. It's going to be unenjoyable to listen to, but you can also work on more techniques and actually making your low end sounding punchier. You can add different plugins. One plugin I love using is the R-Bass plugin from Waves. So let's have a listen to that. Say you've got an instrument that is really lacking in the low end. R-Bass. You can probably already hear that it started adding a frequency at it, and it literally just adds the frequencies. It's a bit like an EQ, but it does it in quite a nice way, I think. I tell you what, let's try in the kick, because that's mostly where I would use it. If I have like a very weak kick that has little to no end on it, it can really add some energy to it. So you can hear it's already added that low end. You can use the intensity here, and then just bring the gain down just to make sure it doesn't clip. Now again, as I said, if you do things in isolation, you might think the instrument sounds absolutely amazing, but as soon as you add it into reference to the mix, it's gonna sound horrible. I don't think this is gonna work personally, but it's got a weird boxiness to it. You can hear it more, but no, I don't like it. Anyway, I believe that's me gone through everything I need to go through for today. Thanks for those of you that are listening. There wasn't that many of you, but oh well. I appreciate you guys turning up anyway. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. It is quite an in-depth topic. There's no way I could go through the whole of like mixing bass within a 1-hour tutorial, but it's definitely a start. It's a place to get you started.